They were sitting at the dinner table when he said it, no warning, no discussion. Just the soft scrape of a chair against the wooden floor, the clink of silverware on porcelain, and then that sentence. "Starting this month, we'll keep our finances separate," Michael said casually, as if announcing the weather. Emma looked up from the steaming roast chicken she'd spent all afternoon preparing. Her hand froze mid-slice, the knife glinting under the kitchen light. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of the trees outside. She didn't scream, she didn't argue, she didn't even raise an eyebrow. "All right," she replied, her voice calm. To calm, that was the moment everything began to change. Not with a fight. Not with a slammed door, but with silence. And if there's one thing I've learned after decades of watching couples drift apart, it's that silence, true, composed, calculated silence, is never innocent. See, people assume the end of a marriage starts with betrayal, or a screaming match, or a suitcase by the door. But more often, it begins in the middle of something ordinary. A dinner table, a Friday night, a sentence that unravels years of quiet sacrifice. Michael had no idea the fuse he just lit. He thought he was being fair, logical, progressive, even. Each of us should take care of our own, he'd reasoned in his mind. He had rehearsed that line in the car on the way home, like an actor practicing his lines for a role he didn't quite understand. To him, this wasn't a declaration of war, it was just the next phase in their marriage. He believed they were mature enough to manage things like roommates. Split the bills, divide the fridge, respect each other's space. He didn't see the weight of what he'd said, but Emma did. You see, for the past 18 years, Emma had been the quiet engine of that household. While Michael sat at the head of the table reading his newspaper, Emma made sure the lights stayed on. She knew which detergent made Lily's skin break out. She remembered the exact way Michael liked his coffee hot, with a splash of half and a hint of cinnamon. She refilled the gas, paid the bills, washed, folded, managed, juggled, and she never once asked to split the load. So when he said it, "We'll keep our finances separate," she didn't flinch, not because it didn't hurt, but because she'd been preparing for this moment far longer than he had. The chicken was his favorite, crisp skin, rosemary, a dash of lemon, the same recipe she'd perfected over nearly 2 decades of Friday night dinners. But now, it sat untouched on his plate, growing cold. Across from them, their daughter Lily leaned into her phone, pretending not to notice, but she did. At 17, Lily had inherited her mother's instincts. She could read tension like sheet music. Her eyes flicked between her parents, fingers tightening around her fork. Michael thought this would be a brief conversation. A minor shift. He didn't expect the silence that followed. Emma served dinner as if nothing had changed, and that's what shook him. She didn't argue, didn't fight for what they had. That rattled him more than any outburst could have. Because when a woman who's carried the weight of a family for 18 years doesn't protest losing it, you begin to wonder if she ever needed you at all. I've seen this pattern before, so many times. It always starts with a man believing he's offering logic, fairness, a new chapter, and he's blindsided when the woman he assumed would collapse instead stands taller, calmer, sharper, and suddenly distant in a way that terrifies him. And that's exactly what happened here. Later that night, Michael would lie awake, unable to sleep, while Emma read quietly beside him. Her presence felt miles away, though her shoulder was just inches from his. She didn't reach for him, didn't ask him what he meant earlier, she simply turned another page. By the next morning, he'd find his favorite coffee missing from the cabinet. His side of the fridge nearly empty, the subtle logistics of daily comfort formerly invisible now gone. This was the beginning of something, but not what he expected. She wasn't reacting, she was responding. Not emotionally, strategically, and that's what makes this story powerful. Because when a woman stops arguing and starts acting, didn't ask him what he meant earlier, she simply turned another page. By the next morning, he'd find his favorite coffee missing from the cabinet. His side of the fridge nearly empty, the subtle logistics of daily comfort formerly invisible now gone. This was the beginning of something, but not what he expected. She wasn't reacting, she was responding. Not emotionally, strategically, and that's what makes this story powerful. Because when a woman stops arguing and starts acting, when she quietly accepts your terms, it's not always agreement. Sometimes, it's the beginning of her exit. If this story pulled something inside you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or maybe even yourself, then you're not alone. This is happening in homes across the world, behind polite smiles and quiet kitchens, and it's time we start talking about it. So if you want to follow the full story and support more powerful, emotionally truthful content like this, please subscribe to the channel. It helps us create more videos that bring these unspoken stories to light. Now, before we move on to the next chapter of this unfolding marriage, here's a small question for you. In a long-term relationship, which do you believe is more dangerous? A silence and emotional distance, be it arguments and open conflict? Comment below with your answer. Let's see how many of us have lived through this in one way or another. Michael didn't notice the shift at first. It came slowly, like the changing of seasons, not with fanfare, but with the quiet, almost imperceptible retreat of warmth. The first sign was the coffee. That velvety Italian roast he loved so much, the one Emma always made sure was in the cabinet, was simply missing. He thought maybe she forgot. She didn't. She remembered everything, she just chose differently now. When he asked, she replied gently, without malice, "It's a bit too expensive for my portion of the budget." "You understand, right?" Her voice was light, like she was discussing the weather. And that lightness unsettled him more than if she'd yelled. This is the thing I've learned after years of watching relationships unravel. When a woman stops reminding you, stops doing the little things that made life smooth and comfortable, it isn't neglect, it's precision. And when she does it without bitterness, you're already behind. The second sign came later that week, when he opened the fridge and found a neatly written note taped to the door. It read, "Left side, Emma and Lily, right side, Michael." The compartments were divided not by food, but by boundaries. On the left, groceries, glass containers of prepared meals, fresh orange juice, yogurt, and Lily's neatly labeled lunch boxes on the right. A half-used stick of butter, a bottle of ketchup, and a sad can of diet soda. His name hung there like a boundary marker, subtle, but undeniable. Michael chuckled at first, but it didn't feel funny. The air in the kitchen felt different now, charged. Like walking through a room where someone had just left, taking something important with them. He hadn't expected her to take the separation of finances so literally. He'd imagined they'd simply have different accounts, maybe split a few bills. But Emma had interpreted it differently. She took him at his word. She stepped back from the center of their shared life and left him to fill the space she'd once occupied. And he realized how large that space was. The gas tank in his car was nearly empty by Thursday. He usually drove it down until it blinked. Then somehow it would be full again thanks to Emma. That week, it wasn't. Nor was there shampoo in the shower. Nor the particular razor blades he preferred. They'd vanished from the drawer like ghosts. He confronted her gently one morning, trying to sound amused, not frustrated. "Hey, we're out of the shaving cream." Emma was tying her sneakers by the front door, ready for her Pilates class. She didn't even look up. "Oh. Must be on your side of the list, my side." She stood, adjusted her scarf, and looked at him with those steady eyes. "I only purchase what I can afford with my budget now. You said we'd manage our own expenses, remember?" It wasn't cruel, it wasn't angry. That's what made it sting. You see, when a man sets the rules, he often assumes he'll still benefit from the old unspoken ones, the invisible labor, the emotional cushioning, the quiet tending to his needs that he's never had to name. But when a woman starts following his rules to the letter, it reveals just how much those unspoken agreements meant. Michael began to feel it everywhere, the unpaid bills that now bore only his name. The utilities she'd stopped covering, the groceries that didn't magically appear. He found himself eating crackers and canned tuna at 9 p.m., staring at the divided fridge, too proud to ask for help, but too hungry to pretend he didn't need it, and still, Emma said nothing. She moved around the house with quiet efficiency, humming while she packed her Pilates bag, sipping her tea in the evening as if life had never been simpler. There was no resentment in her face, only peace that unsettled him. It made him realize something he'd never questioned before. The comfort of their life had always rested on her shoulders. He had always assumed he carried the weight working long hours, managing deals, keeping the financial roof above their heads. But now, with the roof intact and everything else unraveling, he began to see the truth. She had held it all together. She had done so without applause, without complaint. And now that she was gone from that invisible role, the silence echoed louder than any fight ever could. Even Lily noticed. One evening, she walked into the kitchen, saw him rummaging through the nearly bare pantry, and raised an eyebrow. "You good, Dad?" she asked, not unkindly, just aware. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice sharp. She didn't push. She just nodded and moved to the fridge, opened the left side, pulled out a warm slice of apple pie Emma had made, and walked out, leaving him alone with the ketchup bottle and his pride. Later that night, he heard Emma on the phone in the other room, laughing softly with someone, her sister, maybe. Her voice drifted through the walls like a reminder. She wasn't bitter, she was rebuilding something. And that's the most frightening part for many men in Michael's position, not that their wives are angry, but that they've found peace without them. That their absence from the emotional center of the relationship doesn't create chaos, but clarity. Michael went to bed that night with the light still on, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment since his logical announcement. The cost of independence, he realized, wasn't in the money. It was in the distance growing between them, a distance she hadn't closed, because maybe she didn't want to. This wasn't rebellion, it wasn't revenge, it was reality, and she was living it with grace. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. And he wasn't sure how to come back from that. Because you can't argue with a woman who has already accepted your offer of separation and simply decided to let you live it to the very last dollar and to the very last lonely night, not out of anger, out of clarity. By the end of the second week, Michael was beginning to unravel, and not in some cinematic, dramatic explosion, but in the quiet, persistent way a man does when the world he thought he controlled begins slipping through his fingers. He had underestimated what separate finances would actually feel like. At first, it had sounded like a rational decision, a clean division of responsibility, a fair system. But now, as he stood in the middle of a grocery store with a cart half full and his bank app flashing a low balance warning, it dawned on him that logic meant nothing when your pride was burning and your wallet was light. He hadn't budgeted for this, not really. He thought he could handle his share, but the numbers didn't care about his assumptions. The cost of everyday life was louder now, each receipt, each gas station visit, each forgotten necessity that Emma used to replace without a word. He thought he knew what things cost. He didn't, and now he was learning the hard way. Michael had always prided himself on being the provider, the man who kept things running. But now, sitting in traffic with a half-empty tank and the weight of an unpaid utility bill in his glove box, he felt less like a leader and more like a lost passenger. He had no one to blame, and maybe that was the worst part. It was Friday when the final crack appeared. He came home exhausted, the day having drained every ounce of his energy. A deal he'd been counting on had fallen through. His card had been declined at lunch because of an automatic deduction he'd forgotten about. And the sandwich he managed to buy from a vending machine had left his stomach in knots. He pushed open the front door and was greeted by silence. The smell of something warm and buttery floated from the kitchen, and for a moment, hope flickered. Maybe Emma had made her signature cabbage pies the comfort food of his childhood and, oddly enough, his marriage. But when he reached the table, he saw the note before he saw the pies. "This is for us, Emma and Lily. Your half of the fridge is on the right." The handwriting was unmistakable. So was the message. His eyes drifted to the fridge, where the same divide remained. The right side, his side, was barren except for a wrinkled apple, a nearly empty bottle of mustard, and a container of leftovers so questionable even hunger hesitated. He stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, staring at the note. It wasn't just about food anymore, it was about clarity. She was showing him visibly, unflinchingly, what his version of fair looked like when applied without invisible labor. Moments later, Lily walked in, a mug of tea cradled in her hands, earbuds dangling around her neck. She glanced at him and at the untouched pies. "Those are for Mom and me," she said, Not cruelly, but with the kind of firmness that comes from watching someone she once admired slowly reveal his blindness. He didn't answer, couldn't, he simply nodded and walked out of the room. Later that night, he tried to break the ice. Maybe we could have dinner together tomorrow. He called out from the kitchen, trying to keep his tone casual, hopeful. Emma's voice floated back, calm and distant. Sorry, dear Lily, and I already ate. I'm wiped from my workout. There was no malice in her tone. That's what made it worse. In the days that followed, Michael began to feel like a visitor in his own home. The internet stopped working on his laptop. Emma had moved to mobile only, and the home account was still under his name. His gym membership renewal failed. His favorite shaving gel was gone, and the new brand he grabbed in haste made his skin itch. He found himself taking longer routes home from work, as if delaying the moment he had to return to a house that no longer felt like it belonged to him. He sat at the table alone, eating meals he barely tasted, staring at the blank wall across from him where Emma used to sit and talk about her day. Then came Sunday morning. Emma entered the kitchen in a soft plum-colored loungewear set, her hair neatly tied back, her skin glowing with that post-yoga calm that seemed untouchable. She moved through the space like someone at peace. Michael watched her, stunned not by her silence, but by her strength. We need to talk, he said finally, setting down his coffee mug with more force than intended. She turned to him, arms crossed lightly, but her stance was solid. Go ahead. This, he gestured around the fridge, the labels, the silence, isn't working. Let's go back to the way things were. Emma raised an eyebrow. The way things were? He nodded, desperate now. Yes, shared budget. Joint life, everything. She looked at him for a long moment, then walked to the window, her voice quiet but unwavering. I've been thinking, she said, and I believe everything is finally arranged as it should be. He frowned. What does that mean? It means, she turned back to him, that I used to believe we were a team. But over time, I realized I was doing all the invisible work while you took credit for keeping us afloat. And when you asked for separation, I gave you exactly what you asked for. Michael opened his mouth, but she cut him off, not harshly, but firmly. I've been saving for years, she continued. Little by little, I started a business. I learned skills I earned, and I taught Lily to do the same. You didn't see it because you didn't need to. But now you do. He stared at her, stunned. You have a business. I do. I've built something of my own quietly. While you thought you were managing this house, I was preparing to survive without you just in case you ever made the mistake of thinking I was dispensable. And in that moment, the control he thought he had, the authority he believed he carried, cracked wide open. Not with rage, but with the undeniable truth that while he had been standing still, she had been moving forward. And she wasn't asking to go back, not anymore. Michael didn't recognize the man he was becoming, not at first. But as the days passed, he found himself waking up earlier, moving slower, thinking longer. There was a discomfort in the silence now, but not the kind that made you want to run away. This was the kind of silence that demanded you face yourself. He had always believed that being the provider was enough. That bringing home a paycheck, covering the mortgage, paying the insurance, those were the marks of a good husband, a good man. And for a long time, Emma never challenged that belief. She moved in the background, filling in the spaces he never saw, holding together the fabric of a home he thought he'd built. But now that fabric had been rewoven, and this time, he wasn't at the center of the loom. He sat at the kitchen table one Sunday morning with a yellow notepad in front of him and a pen that had already run out of ink once. Across the page were lists: groceries, gas, utilities, upcoming school expenses for Lily, personal care items, subscriptions. Expenses Emma had tracked quietly for years, now exposed in the harsh light of his own handwriting. The math didn't lie, it was tight, tighter than he thought. All the little things added up: the gym membership, the lunches he used to buy without thinking, the name brand coffee he'd always tossed in the cart without checking the price. He had to make choices now, prioritize. And for the first time in his adult life, he found himself respecting the act of choosing. It wasn't just about money, it was about attention. About no longer coasting on the unseen labor of someone else. Emma came into the kitchen around mid-morning, her hair braided, Holding a cup of green tea, she glanced at the notebook, then at him. Her eyes didn't soften, not quite, but there was a flicker of something recognition, perhaps. "How's it going?" she asked, voice light. He looked up at her, his fingers still resting on the calculator balanced. He said, "Just barely." "That's a start," she said, sipping her tea. He paused, watching her. "You've been doing this for years, haven't you?" She nodded once. "Yes, every week." "I knew how much toothpaste cost before you ever noticed we were out of it." He let out a breath. "I didn't know how blind I was." Emma didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just took another sip and leaned against the counter, her body at ease in a home that now operated on different terms. Michael rubbed his temple. "I've had to cancel a few things. My car wash subscription, the craft beer deliveries. I downgraded my streaming plan. Feels strange." "Feels like adulthood," she said, gently, not unkindly. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of a shared reality pressing in around them. But it was a new kind of weight, not heavy with resentment, but grounded in something that felt closer to truth. Emma reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "I've been meaning to show you this," she said, sliding it across the table. Inside were spreadsheets, business plans, product designs, and account statements. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate. The numbers were real, the growth steady. Michael leafed through the documents with growing awe. "This is a full operation." "It is," she said. "I started it 3 years ago, handcrafted skincare and home goods. I didn't want to rely on your income if things ever shifted, so I built something of my own." He looked up at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma's gaze held his, unflinching. "Because I didn't need your permission. And because, frankly, I wasn't sure you would understand. You were always so certain that your job made you irreplaceable." He swallowed hard. It was a sobering thing, realizing the foundation you stood on wasn't yours alone. "And now?" he asked. She paused before answering. "Now, I'm willing to let you in, if you're ready to contribute not just financially, but mentally, emotionally. If you're willing to build something together, not just rely on what I've already created." He nodded slowly, the weight of her offer settling into his chest. It wasn't a handout, it was a proposition for equal partnership, not rescue. "I want to learn," he said, honestly. "I want to be better. I want to earn back what I didn't even realize I'd lost." Emma moved to the other side of the table and sat down. "Then let's begin." Over the next few days, their rhythm changed. Michael started helping with shipments. He read articles Emma sent him about marketing and e-commerce. He asked questions. He watched how she balanced cost and creativity, how she made room for both business and motherhood. He no longer saw her as the woman who simply ran the house. She was a strategist, a leader, a builder. And now, for the first time, he wanted to follow her lead, not because he had to, but because he knew she saw things he'd missed for years. One evening, after dinner, Lily joined them at the table. She pulled out a sketchbook, showing them her designs for a packaging concept Emma had encouraged her to develop. Michael looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a young woman who was growing in the shadow of strength, not submission. "You're building a future," he said to both of them. Emma smiled, not with triumph, but with quiet pride. "No," she replied, "we are." That night, Michael lay in bed beside Emma. For the first time in months, the space between them didn't feel so vast. He didn't reach for her hand immediately. He didn't ask for forgiveness in words. He simply turned toward her and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on yourself." "Even when I didn't see you." Emma didn't answer right away. Then, softly, she said, "You didn't need to see me then. You need to see me now." And he did, for the first time. He truly did. 3 weeks had passed since the conversation that changed the course of their marriage, not with shouting or slamming doors, but with a calm that carried the weight of finality. The house, once filled with the subtle imbalances of assumption and silence, now held a new energy, quiet, yes, but no longer laced with resentment. The rhythm had changed, and this time, they were both keeping time. Michael sat at the kitchen table, a fresh notebook open in front of him. 2 columns, one for him, one for Emma: grocery lists, recurring expenses, savings goals. He had never imagined he'd be here, itemizing dollar amounts with the same care Emma once used without recognition. The calculator sat quietly beside his coffee cup, and this time he knew exactly how much the beans cost, how long they'd last, and whether he could afford another bag before payday. Across from him, the old kitchen clock ticked, steady but slightly offbeat, its chipped face a reminder of the past. Above it, a new clock hung clean and modern, with a silent sweep. Emma insisted on keeping both. They don't have to match, she'd said. They just have to keep time, he understood now. The past didn't need to be erased to make space for what was coming. It only needed to be seen clearly, acknowledged. Emma walked into the room wearing a soft sweater the colour of autumn leaves. She poured herself a cup of tea, then leaned over to glance at his notes. Her eyes scanned the figures, her lips curving slightly. "You're getting good at this," she said. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I'm learning, finally." She pulled out a chair and joined him. "That's all I ever wanted, not perfection. Just awareness, presence." He nodded, unsure what to say for so long. His presence had been measured by his paycheck, his job title, the hours he claimed to work. But none of that had kept their family warm, fed, or emotionally safe. What Emma had managed behind the scenes was far more complex than any corporate meeting he'd ever attended. Lily came bounding down the stairs, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She stopped by the fridge, pulled out a sandwich she'd labelled herself, and grabbed a juice box before turning to her parents. "I'm heading to the library after school," she said. "Working on that Etsy store concept I think I'm going to launch next month." Emma beamed. "You've got this," Michael smiled, pride swelling in his chest. His daughter wasn't waiting for opportunity, she was building it. Watching her now, he saw the reflection of Emma's quiet strength, her grounded confidence. It humbled him in ways he hadn't expected. "By the way, I saw your little budgeting column," Lily added, smirking playfully at her dad. "Not bad for a rookie," he laughed. "I'm being trained by the best." She rolled her eyes in mock protest, then leaned over and kissed her mom's cheek. "Love you both, see you later." And then she was gone, her footsteps echoing briefly down the hallway before fading into the morning. The house felt spacious, but not empty. It breathed now, instead of holding tension in its walls. Michael reached into a shopping bag by his feet and pulled out a jar of Emma's favourite herbal honey. "I picked this up for you," he said, placing it on the table. She blinked, surprised. "You remembered?" He shrugged. "You used to keep 2 jars, one for the house and one for your tea. I always dipped into the wrong one, figured it was time I bought my own." Emma reached out and touched his hand, lightly. "That means more than you think." He cleared his throat. "I've also been thinking. If you're still open to it, I'd like to be part of the business. Not to take it over, just to support, to learn. To carry the weight with you." Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out a crisp white envelope. Inside was a refined business plan, tighter than the one she'd shown him before. Growth goals, inventory strategies, expansion ideas. She'd even penciled in a role for him, marketing and logistics. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said softly. "But only if we're clear on what partnership means. It's not one person managing while the other observes. It's not about power, it's about contribution." "I understand," he said, and this time he meant it. She handed him a pen. "Then sign it." He laughed, but took the pen anyway. And in that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but within him. It wasn't just a document, it was a symbol, a beginning. Not of their marriage that had been long established, but of their redefined union. One where each carried weight, voice, and value. One where neither had to sacrifice themselves for the illusion of stability. That evening, the family sat down to dinner. Michael had helped with the cooking, a simple stir-fry, nothing fancy, but it was the first meal they'd made together in a long time. Emma passed him the soy sauce. Lily recounted her latest sketches, and laughter moved freely between them. Later, as they cleaned up, Michael stood at the sink washing dishes while Emma dried. They worked side by side, quiet but comfortable. No tension, no scripts, just shared space. As he passed her a plate, he glanced at the 2 clocks on the wall. "I used to hate that old clock," he said, "always ticking too loud." Emma looked at him, eyes thoughtful. "And now?" Now, I think it just wanted to be heard, she smiled, don't we all? And with that, they moved forward not in perfect harmony, but in step, on equal footing, and finally, as partners, not players in a silent game of imbalance. In every marriage, there comes a silent reckoning, a moment when all the unspoken imbalances, unnoticed efforts, and unmet needs quietly surface. What happened between Michael and Emma was not a dramatic explosion, nor was it a scandalous betrayal. It was something far more relatable, far more human, the slow erosion of partnership under the weight of assumption and comfort. For years, Michael believed he was fulfilling his role simply by providing. Meanwhile, Emma bore the emotional, logistical, and invisible labor that kept their home alive, unacknowledged, uncelebrated, and unpaid. But when Emma stopped compensating for the imbalance, when she let silence speak instead of stepping in to rescue, Michael was forced to see what had always been there, and to his credit, he didn't run. He didn't fight to reclaim a version of manhood built on control, he evolved. What makes this story powerful is not the confrontation, it's the transformation. It's the quiet journey of a man learning how to be a partner, not a patriarch. It's the image of a woman who never shouted to be seen, but instead reclaimed her power by simply no longer shrinking. And most importantly, it's the portrait of a family learning how to rebuild, not from the ashes of conflict, but from the recognition of one another's full humanity. In real life, these shifts are often too subtle for a camera. They happen in kitchens, over unpaid bills, in the decision to share a burden or speak a truth. They don't always come with applause. But they are the moments that save marriages, not by going back to how things were, but by growing into something new. This story reminds us that partnership is not a destination, it's a discipline. It requires ongoing listening, humility, and a willingness to change. It also asks us to examine our quiet biases. Who do we expect to do the emotional labor? Who tracks the needs of the children? Who notices when the fridge is low or the laundry is piling up? True love is not just about romantic gestures or anniversaries, it's about shared responsibility, respect, and equity. So what's the deeper lesson? That equality in relationships is not given, it's practiced. It's in the way we respond when our partner stops filling in the gaps. It's in how we adjust when our assumptions no longer go unchallenged. And most importantly, it's in the way we learn to rebuild, not by asserting authority, but by offering humility and participation. If you're in a relationship, ask yourself, are you building together? Or are you resting on someone else's unpaid labor, emotional, mental, or financial? And if you're the one who's been silently carrying the weight, remember, you don't need to scream to reclaim your voice. Sometimes, the most powerful shift begins when you simply stop compensating and let the imbalance speak for itself. Now, let me ask you this simple question. If you were Emma, would you have spoken up earlier or stayed silent like she did to let the imbalance reveal itself? And I would speak up clearly and early, but I would stay silent and let reality teach the lesson. Let me know your answer in the comments below. Your opinion matters and it might inspire someone else too. If you found value in this story, please consider subscribing to this channel. It helps us grow and reach more people with stories that heal, teach, and inspire. And if you feel called to support our work, even a small donation means a lot. I'm no longer young, but I still believe in giving back to society through the power of storytelling. Your support helps keep this mission alive. Every view, every comment, every share, every donation, it fuels the fire to keep going and create more meaningful content for you. Thank you for listening. Let's keep growing together.